Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the Islamic SHAHADA channel. In the heart of the Arabian Peninsula lies a nation that is both the guardian of Islam's holiest sites and the architect of some of the most controversial policies in the modern Muslim world. Saudi Arabia, home to Mecca and Medina, where millions of Muslims perform pilgrimage every year, is more than just a spiritual destination. It is a state where tradition collides with rapid modernization, where sacred history is preserved yet also erased, and where Islam is both elevated and questioned. Today, we explore Islam in Saudi Arabia, between tradition and modern controversy. In the heart of Saudi Arabia stand the two holiest sites in Islam, Mecca with the Kaaba at its center, and Medina, home to the Prophet's mosque. For over 14 centuries, these cities have been the spiritual axis of the Muslim world, uniting believers from every continent in prayer and pilgrimage. Today, Saudi Arabia presents itself not just as the political custodian of these sacred sites, but as the sole guardian of Islam's most revered spaces. This unique position grants the kingdom unmatched religious influence, shaping the global Muslim experience in ways no other nation can. Each year, the Hajj pilgrimage draws more than 2 million Muslims from across the globe. Managing such an immense gathering in the modern age requires more than tradition. It demands advanced technology, meticulous organization, and global coordination. In recent years, Saudi Arabia has invested heavily in artificial intelligence systems for crowd control, ensuring that the flow of pilgrims remains orderly and that risks of stampedes, once a tragic hallmark of Hajj history, are minimized. Cooling systems are embedded across the Grand Mosque and along major routes to counter the extreme desert heat, while real-time monitoring tools track pilgrim movement, health emergencies, and logistical bottlenecks. Yet, alongside this impressive modernization, controversy is never far behind. For many, the experience of Hajj and Umrah has become increasingly commercialized. The costs associated with performing the pilgrimage have risen steeply, with package prices in 2025 often reaching levels far beyond the means of poorer Muslims in Africa, South Asia, and parts of the Middle East. Critics argue that what should be a spiritual obligation accessible to all has been transformed into a privilege for the wealthy. Saudi Arabia has also tightened its regulations on who can attend. Age restrictions have been introduced, barring young children from accompanying their families, while unauthorized pilgrims who attempt to bypass the permit system now face heavy fines and even deportation in some cases. Officials defend these measures as necessary for maintaining order and safety in an era of mass travel, but detractors see them as stripping away the inclusivity and communal spirit that once defined the pilgrimage. This tension between facilitation and restriction reflects the broader paradox of Saudi Arabia's custodianship. On one hand, the kingdom has undeniably safeguarded Mecca and Medina with modern infrastructure, medical facilities, and unparalleled logistical capability. On the other, it has raised uncomfortable questions. Should the holiest sites of Islam be governed like a state-controlled corporation? Is spiritual devotion being overshadowed by commercial interests and political authority? For millions of Muslims, visiting Mecca and Medina remains the most profound experience of their lives, a once-in-a-lifetime spiritual journey. Yet beneath the surface of sacred ritual lies a complex reality. Saudi Arabia's role as the custodian is both a blessing and a burden, balancing the needs of faith, safety, and sovereignty in a world where Islam's holiest traditions are increasingly entangled with modern controversy. Saudi Arabia today is home to nearly 37 million people, with more than 90% identifying as Muslim. This makes the kingdom one of the largest concentrations of Muslims in the Middle East, and perhaps the most symbolically important population in the Islamic world, given its role as the custodian of Mecca and Medina. But beneath this overwhelming majority lies a complex demographic reality, one shaped by sectarian divisions, migration, and social inequality. The vast majority of Saudi Muslims are Sunni, with the state's religious identity historically rooted in Hanbali jurisprudence and Wahhabi interpretations of Islam. However, Saudi Arabia is not entirely homogeneous. Shia Muslims form an estimated 10 to 15% of the population, and their presence is especially concentrated in the oil-rich eastern province. For decades, Shia communities have reported systemic discrimination, limited access to political representation, restrictions on religious expression, and underrepresentation in leadership roles across government, the military, and education. While recent reforms under Vision 2030 have sought to integrate minority voices more visibly, sectarian tensions still simmer, particularly around issues of loyalty, security, and religious freedom. At the same time, Saudi Arabia's population is far more diverse than it may appear from the outside. Millions of non-Saudi residents, primarily migrant workers, form a critical part of the country's labor force. These workers come from South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa, with significant communities from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Ethiopia, and Sudan. Many of them are Muslim, but a sizable number are Christian, Hindu, or Buddhist. Despite their indispensable role in building the kingdom's infrastructure and sustaining its economy, migrant workers often face harsh working conditions, limited rights, and systemic discrimination under the kafala sponsorship system. This demographic complexity reveals a paradox at the heart of Saudi Arabia. To the outside world, it is the spiritual epicenter of Islam, a land where millions of Muslims long to visit at least once in their lifetime. Yet inside the kingdom, the lived reality of faith is stratified. Sunni citizens enjoy a privileged position. Shia communities continue to navigate the challenges of marginalization, and millions of migrant workers, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, remain vulnerable, often treated as outsiders in the land that hosts Islam's holiest sites. This raises a difficult question. How does the spiritual heart of Islam reconcile its global image of unity with the divisions, inequalities, and exclusions present within its own borders? For many observers, the answer reveals not only the challenges of Saudi society, but also the broader struggles of Islam in the modern world. How to balance faith, diversity, and justice in an era of rapid change. In recent years, Saudi Arabia has undergone one of the most ambitious transformations in its modern history, driven by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030. Designed to diversify the economy away from oil dependency, the program has also redefined social life in ways that would have seemed unimaginable only a decade ago. Concerts, cinemas, and global sporting events are now common in the kingdom, where once even basic forms of public entertainment were banned. Music festivals attract international artists, while Saudi Arabia has positioned itself as a hub for Formula One races, world boxing championships, and even futuristic mega-projects like NEOM, a planned smart city meant to symbolize the nation's forward-looking identity. Tourism, too, has expanded, with new visa programs inviting millions of international visitors each year, not just for pilgrimage, but for leisure and cultural exploration. Perhaps the most striking changes have been in the role of women. Since 2018, Saudi women have gained the right to drive, travel abroad without male guardianship, and enter professions long closed to them. By 2025, women occupy roles as CEOs, diplomats, and even senior positions within government ministries. Female labor participation has doubled compared to a decade ago, signaling a dramatic reshaping of social norms. To many observers, these reforms represent long overdue progress, a chance for Saudi Arabia to join the ranks of modern, open societies while still maintaining its Islamic foundation. Yet these changes are far from universally embraced. Critics question whether such reforms are truly rooted in social progress, or whether they are carefully orchestrated efforts to improve Saudi Arabia's international image, attract investment, and soften criticism of its political record. While the state celebrates modernization, conservative Muslims both inside and outside the kingdom voice concern that the line between cultural development. The stakes are high. For many Saudis, modernization has improved daily life, expanded opportunities, and brought a sense of connection to the wider world. But for others, it represents a profound spiritual risk, a dilution of Islamic values in pursuit of worldly recognition. And as Saudi Arabia continues to walk this tightrope, the question remains, can the kingdom modernize without losing the religious authority that has defined it for centuries? Perhaps the most emotional and divisive controversy surrounding Saudi Arabia's role as the custodian of Islam's holiest lands lies in its approach to Islamic heritage and historic sites. For centuries, the sacred cities of Mecca and Medina were not only centers of pilgrimage, but also living museums of early Islamic history, where mosques, homes, and shrines told the story of the Prophet Muhammad, his family, and his companions. Today, much of that tangible heritage is gone, erased in the name of modernization and religious purity. Among the most painful losses is the house of Khadijah, the Prophet's first wife and one of the earliest believers in Islam. Once a site of deep reverence, it was demolished and replaced with public facilities, erasing a direct link to the Prophet's personal life. Similarly, the graveyard of Jannat al-Baqi in Medina, which once held beautifully crafted shrines marking the resting places of the Prophet's family and closest companions, was flattened in the early 20th century under Wahhabi influence. Today, it remains an open field of unmarked graves, deeply upsetting Shia and Sunni Muslims alike, who view this as a loss not only of sacred memory, but of cultural continuity. The destruction has not been limited to religiously sensitive sites. Centuries of Ottoman and Abbasid architecture, which once adorned Mecca and Medina, have been demolished to make way for modern infrastructure, luxury hotels, and shopping malls. Towers of glass and steel now overshadow the Kaaba, with the iconic Mecca Clock Tower, one of the tallest buildings in the world, symbolizing both Saudi Arabia's economic ambition and the transformation of a sacred city into a commercial hub. Saudi authorities defend these decisions with two arguments. First, they insist that removing structures linked to revered figures prevents Muslims from engaging in idolatry, in line with the Wahhabi interpretation of Islam that strictly opposes shrine veneration. Second, they argue that urban expansion is necessary to accommodate millions of pilgrims during Hajj and Umrah, prioritizing functionality and safety over historical preservation. Yet, critics see something far more troubling, a deliberate erasure of Islamic history that cannot be undone. To them, Saudi Arabia has traded the heritage of Islam for modern convenience, depriving future generations of the chance to connect physically with the places where their faith began. The irony is sharpened by the kingdom's simultaneous promotion of pre-Islamic heritage sites, such as the Nabatean city of Al-Ula, which is marketed globally as a symbol of Saudi Arabia's ancient cultural wealth. While early Islamic landmarks are bulldozed, pre-Islamic ruins are preserved, restored, and showcased to tourists, creating a stark contrast in what is remembered and what is erased. This contradiction raises profound questions. Whose history is being preserved, and whose is being silenced? Can the destruction of early Islamic sites truly be justified as religious protection, or is it an irreversible loss of identity for the global Muslim community? As Saudi Arabia moves further into its modern era, this debate over history and memory remains one of the most painful rifts between the kingdom and Muslims worldwide who yearn to safeguard their spiritual past. To understand Islam in Saudi Arabia, one cannot ignore Wahhabism, the official religious doctrine that has defined the kingdom since its founding. Originating in the 18th century under the reformer Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, this movement was born in Central Arabia and allied itself with the House of Saud. That alliance, between religious Puritanism and political power, became the bedrock of the modern Saudi state. At its core, Wahhabism emphasizes an uncompromising form of tawhid, or monotheism, and a fierce rejection of anything seen as bid'ah, religious innovation. Practices such as shrine veneration, visiting tombs, or using intercessors in prayer are condemned as forms of shirk or idolatry. This interpretation, while claiming to preserve Islam in its purest form, has set Saudi Arabia apart from much of the Muslim world, where traditions such as Sufism, saint veneration, or diverse schools of thought have flourished for centuries. For decades, Wahhabism was not just a theological stance, but the guiding framework of Saudi Arabia's laws, education system, and religious institutions. From the school curriculum to Friday sermons, its influence permeated every aspect of public life. The notorious religious police, Mutawa, patrolled the streets, enforcing strict gender segregation, regulating dress codes, and ensuring compliance with Wahhabi norms. But Wahhabism has always been controversial. Critics argue that its rigidity fosters intolerance toward other Muslim traditions, particularly Shia Muslims and Sufi practitioners, who have often been marginalized or openly vilified under Saudi religious discourse. Beyond its borders, Wahhabism has been accused of fueling radicalism, as Saudi-funded mosques and institutions exported this puritanical worldview across Africa, Asia, and the West throughout the 20th century. To many scholars, this global export helped lay the ideological foundation for extremist movements, even if Saudi authorities officially denounced terrorism. Supporters, however, defend Wahhabism as nothing more than Islam stripped of cultural distortions. To them, it is the only authentic continuation of the Prophet's teachings, untainted by superstition or innovation. They credit it with keeping Saudi society disciplined, unified, and anchored in faith despite the temptations of modernity. In recent years, however, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has sought to recalibrate the role of Wahhabism in society. Under Vision 2030, the power of the religious police has been dramatically reduced, with officers no longer authorized to make arrests. Concerts, cinemas, and mixed-gender spaces, once unimaginable under strict Wahhabi control, are now increasingly common. The Crown Prince has promoted a new narrative of moderate Islam, framing it as a rejection of extremism and an embrace of global modernity. Yet, many remain skeptical. Is this truly a theological reform, a reimagining of Saudi Arabia's religious foundation? Or is it simply a political maneuver to attract investment, improve international standing, and portray the kingdom as a progressive force, while Wahhabism remains deeply embedded in its identity? For all the visible reforms, Saudi textbooks, mosques, and clerical structures still carry Wahhabi influence, and its legacy continues to shape the nation's moral compass. As Saudi Arabia pushes forward with modernization, the tension between Wahhabism as tradition and moderate Islam as political branding remains unresolved. The question for 2025 and beyond is whether the kingdom can truly redefine its religious identity, or whether Wahhabism will continue to cast its long shadow over the future of Islam in Saudi Arabia. When discussing Islam in Saudi Arabia, the issue of human rights cannot be ignored. The kingdom has long balanced its identity as the guardian of Islam's holiest sites with a justice system rooted in Sharia law. But in practice, that balance has sparked some of the sharpest criticisms directed at Saudi Arabia by international organizations and human rights groups. According to Amnesty International and other monitors, Saudi Arabia remains one of the world's leading countries in carrying out executions. In 2024, hundreds of people were executed, many of them foreign workers accused of drug-related crimes. Public beheadings, while less frequent than in the past, still take place, and capital punishment applies not only to murder, but also to drug trafficking, terrorism, and certain acts deemed to threaten social stability. Critics argue that these punishments disproportionately affect the poor and vulnerable, especially migrants from South Asia and Africa, who often lack legal representation or the financial resources to defend themselves in court. At the same time, Saudi Arabia has revived stricter monitoring of so-called immoral acts, targeting offenses such as prostitution, begging, and behaviors viewed as un-Islamic in public spaces. While these crackdowns are presented as protecting Islamic morality and preserving public order, many observers see them as selective enforcement. The wealthy and well-connected are often shielded, while the burden of punishment falls most heavily on marginalized groups, the poor, migrants, and women with little social protection. Supporters of the system argue that this reflects a genuine attempt to defend Islamic values against moral decline. For them, strong enforcement of Sharia is what prevents Saudi society from falling into chaos or adopting Western permissiveness. They point to the relative safety of Saudi cities, low crime rates, and the absence of widespread social unrest as evidence that strict laws uphold social harmony. Critics, however, counter that what is being enforced is less about Islamic justice and more about political control under the guise of religion. They argue that Islam's principles of fairness, mercy, and equality are often overshadowed by the kingdom's use of law as a tool to silence dissent, regulate morality, and maintain the power of the ruling elite. The global Muslim community, too, is divided. Some admire Saudi Arabia's toughness in upholding Islamic order, while others see it as a distortion of the faith's true spirit of compassion and justice. This tension lies at the heart of the Saudi paradox. The nation that calls itself the custodian of Islam also stands accused of violating the very principles of justice, equality, and dignity that Islam upholds. And as the kingdom continues to navigate its path between modernization and religious authority, the question remains, does Saudi Arabia's approach to human rights reflect authentic Islamic governance, or is it a system designed to protect power first and faith second? When speaking about Saudi Arabia, it is impossible to separate faith from politics. The kingdom is not only the custodian of Islam's two holiest sites, Mecca and Medina, but also a global political powerhouse whose influence extends far beyond religion. Its immense oil wealth, strategic geographic position, and deep ties with the West, particularly the United States, have placed Saudi Arabia at the center of global geopolitics for decades. This dual role has often forced the kingdom to balance between its religious identity as the heart of the Muslim world and its national interests as a modern state seeking power and security. Oil remains the bedrock of Saudi Arabia's power. As the world's largest oil exporter, the kingdom holds immense leverage over energy markets. This influence translates into political capital. When Riyadh speaks, markets tremble, and global leaders listen. Yet in recent years, Saudi Arabia has faced the challenge of diversifying its economy through Vision 2030, a modernization project that seeks to reduce dependence on oil, attract foreign investment, and open up society. These economic ambitions require strong relationships with the West and even with non-Muslim powers, sometimes placing the kingdom at odds with expectations from the wider Muslim community. One of the sharpest points of contention is Saudi Arabia's foreign policy toward Palestine. Historically, the kingdom positioned itself as a defender of Palestinian rights, funding initiatives and voicing support in international forums. Yet in practice, its stance has often been muted. While many Muslim-majority countries, and indeed the global Muslim community, view the Palestinian struggle as central to Islamic solidarity, Saudi Arabia's approach has grown more cautious. Critics argue that Riyadh's muted responses, especially in times of heightened conflict, such as during Israeli military campaigns in Gaza, reflect a prioritization of political pragmatism over religious duty. For the kingdom, maintaining strong security and economic partnerships with Western powers often takes precedence over more vocal support for Palestine. Linked to this is the controversial question of normalization with Israel. In 2020, several Gulf states, including the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, signed the Abraham Accords, establishing open ties with Israel. Saudi Arabia did not immediately follow, but discussions and signals suggested that normalization was under consideration. By 2025, reports indicate that quiet diplomatic engagement continues behind closed doors. especially around security cooperation and technology exchange. Proponents argue that normalization could bring stability, investment, and strategic advantages in a volatile region. Opponents, however, see it as a betrayal of Palestine and a weakening of Islamic unity, raising the question of whether Saudi Arabia is prioritizing national interest over its symbolic role as guardian of the Muslim world. This balancing act is not limited to Palestine. Saudi Arabia's foreign policies often reflect a tension between Islamic identity and realpolitik. In its rivalry with Iran, for instance, sectarian and geopolitical interests intersect. While Saudi Arabia claims to represent Sunni leadership in the Muslim world, its competition with Shia-majority Iran is not only theological, but also rooted in regional dominance, proxy conflicts, and control over strategic corridors. Similarly, Saudi Arabia's alliances with the United States and European powers are framed by security and economic needs, even when these alliances clash with popular Muslim opinion on global issues. For many observers, Saudi Arabia embodies a paradox. It is at once the spiritual heart of Islam and a state that relentlessly pursues its own national ambitions. Supporters of the kingdom argue that this pragmatism is necessary. Without securing political power and economic stability, Saudi Arabia cannot protect its holy sites or continue serving millions of Muslim pilgrims each year. Critics, however, contend that the kingdom has drifted too far from its Islamic mission, using religion when convenient while compromising on issues that deeply matter to Muslims worldwide. As the world moves deeper into the 21st century, this dual identity of Saudi Arabia, both as the epicenter of faith and as a geopolitical actor, will continue to define its role. Every policy decision it makes reverberates beyond its borders, influencing not only regional dynamics, but also the perception of Islam on the global stage. Saudi Arabia's challenge remains. Can it be both the guardian of Islam and a modern state navigating the ruthless currents of global politics without losing credibility in either sphere? Saudi Arabia today embodies one of the greatest paradoxes of the modern Muslim world. It is the birthplace of Islam, the guardian of Mecca and Medina, and the host of millions of pilgrims each year who retrace the footsteps of the Prophet. Yet it is also a nation deeply entangled in global markets, high-stakes politics, and cultural reforms that often sit uneasily with its religious legacy. The kingdom stands at a crossroads, between tradition and modernity, faith and politics, spirituality and commerce. For its supporters, Saudi Arabia's transformation represents the necessary evolution of Islam in the 21st century. They argue that the kingdom is proving that Islam and modernity can coexist, that religious devotion can thrive alongside skyscrapers, international investments, and social reforms. They see the country's push for moderate Islam as a way to safeguard faith from extremism while opening new horizons for the Muslim world. For its critics, however, this path is far more troubling. They see in Saudi Arabia's policies the erasure of Islamic history, the dilution of spiritual values, and the prioritization of political and economic gains over religious responsibility. From the destruction of historic sites to the muted stance on Palestine, these critics argue that the kingdom risks distorting Islam, reshaping it less as a universal faith and more as a tool of statecraft. What cannot be denied is that the choices Saudi Arabia makes reverberate across the entire Muslim world. With its unmatched wealth, influence, and religious symbolism, every reform, every alliance, and every compromise carries global implications. The kingdom does not simply shape its own destiny, it shapes how Islam itself is perceived and lived in the modern era. The question then remains unresolved. Will Saudi Arabia preserve the sacred trust it holds as the heart of Islam, remaining faithful to its history and responsibility? Or will it continue to redefine Islam according to its own political ambitions and modern image? The answer will determine not only the future of the kingdom, but also the very identity of Islam in the 21st century. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope it was useful. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.